Hey, good morning, everyone, or whatever time it is for you. This is, well, I guess if I use my YouTube name, this is Danziber here. And today's devlog number 16, I figured I'd do something a little different, and that is display the sausage making. In particular, I'm going to show the only two programs that I use, well, three if you include the audio recording program. But yes, the two programs that I use. And first, let's look at the art. The art is all done in a program called Sprite, spelled like this, Sprite. And I'm using the beta version, currently the beta, version 1.3. And the reason is it has a nice, really nice tile set feature. And with all the tiling I do, there is no way that I could use an art program that doesn't have tile sets. Now, first let's walk through the, my process of making art. And also, if I zoom out a little bit, this is the map of the first village, and I'm curious, this village is actually modeled after a village in a different game. And I'm curious if anyone can identify it. But notice there's already a tile set up here. And there's a reason for that, which I might get to later. But yeah, here's the village. Let's go through the process. In Sprite, you have all these layers and these frames. I'm going to hide all the layers right now and only look at the layer called Forest Town Tiles. So here, this is my tile set. And we have some basic things like, these are just placeholders to make things line up nicely over here, because I like to do groups of 3, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But there's always this, well, maybe you can change it, I don't know how. There's this empty one that you'd use as an eraser in the top left. So to make the groups of 3 work nicely, I put it a 1 and a 2. But with that said, I like to do groups of 3. So you see 3 treetops. If you look closely, these are like trees with the left and right transparent. And this is, or 3 of those. The next 3 only have the left transparent. So you'd use that on like a left border. So woods on the right, not woods on the left. 3 of these. And then 3 that are filled in on the left and the right. And 3 that are empty on the right. Then we have 3 tree trunks. And then next up we have grass in the middle. Whoops. Dirt in the middle. Grass on the outside. 3 top left corners. 3 tops. 3 top rights. 3 lefts, middles, rights, and so on. And it ends up looking something like this when you actually make a tile set out of it. And decorations and things of that nature. One key difference is for the water, this is strictly directional. So this is water flowing in the up-left direction. And instead of having 3 of each that I spread kind of like randomly to have them look random, this is frame 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 to get an animation. Where the water is different because it's animated and nothing else is. At least not in Sprite. And also these are shadows. These shadows look kind of weird. Like this one looks darker, but it's because Sprite has a grid background, checkered background, and the background itself is darker. So these are both 50% opacity, I believe. But this one looks darker. That's just because of the background. And with that said, oh, and I got my house stuff down here. And flowers, etc., groups of trees. A jug, vase. With that said, I'll hide this one. And then actually look at how the village is made up. All the layers that go into it. Also, I'm working on a laptop, by the way, so it's kind of not real fast. Right now we're on Kivki, which is the name of the village. 10 E-bucks if you get that reference. And okay, I'll display everything. This village is displayed like the way a sprite displays things, I mean, is from the bottom up. It's like this waterbed, which is near the bottom, is going to be drawn in the back. Oops. And then the shadows on the waterbed is drawn on top of that, and then the water, and so on and so forth. So what I'll do is this here, I will just display the different layers in the order that you see them. So again, hide everything. First thing you see is the waterbed. So here is the waterbed for the first village. On top of that is drawn shadows. And this actually, these two here would make up my first export. Like the way the game actually uses it. More on that in a minute. Next thing that's drawn is the water. On top of that is the ground layer. And then the shadows on the ground, mostly for here for the little plateau area, and then for the houses. And then now for stuff on the ground, I have, I guess, 4 layers. The back, the where most of the stuff goes, the front, and then an extra layer for the door. And this is only because I used to only have one. This is because I needed a bunch of layers to get the houses to look decent. So the door, if I didn't have this layer, let me close down a little. If I didn't have this layer and I tried to draw this next to the door, I would actually replace the entire tile here and it would mess up what's going on over here. Anyway, long story short, I have a bunch of layers because, mostly because the houses. And then we get shadows on the stuff on the ground, which would be, so shadows on ground, those go directly on the ground, but shadows on stuff on ground, they could go in front of, say, like this tree over here. Whereas the shadows on the ground are things on the ground, casting shadows on the ground. And this is, well, you probably get it right. Okay, next we get foreground, back. This is just to put, well, it's partially due to, you know what? It's actually due to the roofs here. Same issue as before. I needed a bunch of foreground layers. Here's the main one, where all the junk popped up. I needed a bunch of foreground layers to make the buildings look nice. And this is how it looks at the end when everything is displayed back to front. Now I mentioned exports earlier. You know what? We can get to that right now. So here's the village. Take a good look. We're donezo. Let's go over to Godot. So the other program I use, the actual like game making software, it's called Godot, G-O-D-O-T. Some people say Godot or something like that, but I heard Godot. Seems legit. It's totally free, open source, great fan community. I used to use Game Maker Studio version 1.4, and I would highly recommend changing to Godot for a few different reasons. The change was a bit difficult, but I think it was definitely a good change to make. And if you wish to learn how to use Godot, I would suggest a certain tutorial. See, Art Beast Studios is a little indie company of a guy named Benjamin Anderson. And you can do like Godot tutorial series. And I'm on this one right now, but I did the action RPG one. Yes, this one here. Make an action RPG in Godot 3.2. And there are maybe 20 total videos, but he teaches you how to, surprise, make an action RPG. That was my introduction to Godot. Okay, with that said, here's Godot. You open up Godot, looks like this. What's happening here is the first thing that's loaded is what I'm calling a controller. And what this controller will do when all my systems are in place is, actually let's look down here real quick. So I have these different systems. You'll have the walking system, which we've seen in the videos so far, but we're also going to need things like an intro at some point, cutscenes at some point, and battle at some point, and the controller will control like transitioning from one of those to the other, because for resource purposes, you don't want to have all of these active at the same time. I mean, to my understanding, I'm not like professionally trained or didn't take much college or any courses really, other than the YouTube by Ben. But so yeah, this controller would like, for example, if you transition from walking to battle, the controller would have a hand in deleting the walking and creating the battle. The controller is really, there's not much to it because all it does is this thing here is a script. This is like the engine for the controller, so to speak. So controller doesn't have many like nodes going on. They're called nodes. Pretty much everything is going to be in the script. And also, this all white is for, it's one of the transitions, but this blue rectangle here is what is displayed on the screen. What I really wanted to showcase was, if we go into walking, scroll down a little, here's this walking scene. Oh, in fact, one of the first things the controller does is, in fact, like the first thing it does is it loads up the walking scene. So everything, so controller. So if I were to hit the compile button, which I won't, then controller would run its script. When the controller is ready, it adds this walking scene as a child. So pretty much this is the first thing that appears for the time being. Later on it'll be intro. Now walking scene here, oh, there's a lot more stuff going on, right? So controller, not much. Walking, quite a bit of stuff. And if we go to 2D, then, ooh, this looks kind of messy. What's happening is these are transitions, and this is like a background, but we don't see the village. That's because this these things, like the player and the camera, and this has to do with the menu. Well, the UI, I guess, UI and menu. All this stuff persists when the different rooms are created and destroyed. So the next thing I want to do is, and I'll talk more about that in a second, is go to actually the first room. It's probably on Jasum. 10 E-bucks for anyone that recognized that reference. So Jasum, Kifki, and then Kifki scene. Boom, here's the village, which looks different from when you're actually playing it. So now each zone or room, whatever you want to call it, pretty much has the same template. The rooms could have animals, and I separate the animals from NPCs for reasons not super important. And there's stuff, which is, this would be like treasure chests. And then the searchables are things you search. Okay, obviously, I guess. Like, let's look at, say, over here. If you're standing here and facing to the left and hit the confirm button, this little blue box here, let's go to searchables. Scroll down a little bit. Yeah, it's west. So here, it's not drawn. It doesn't have like a sprite associated with it. But this, if Zemi were to walk up here, then you hit the Z button, she'll interact with this invisible thing. So I'm calling them searchables, or like this one here, which is jar 4, I suppose. This is another searchable. And it's drawn, well, okay, how to explain this? So jar 4 itself, like in the game, does not have a sprite associated to it. It is merely put on top of something that was made in a sprite. So a sprite, you check it out, boom, there's jar. Here, this is just something without a sprite on top of essentially the background, which is different from the treasure chest. You look here, no treasure chest. You look here, treasure chest. Let's hide this. And they also have, this is the layers I was talking about. So there are, for my exports from Godot, whoops, said that backwards, exports from Sprite, there are, I like group them into 4 chunks. There's the subwater, which is the water bed in the shadows, together. On top of that is the water. And here the water, I said was in 4s. I didn't show it in a sprite. If I go to the different, oops, if I go to the different frames here, you can actually see the water animate. When I do that, it's going to look kind of weird. Oh, too far. Yeah, here, the water, I had to, this is actually a huge pain in the butt, which I'm thinking about changing. What I had to do is change, like for this one, this left, the first one, for the first frame, I use this left, and then for the second frame, I use this left. Then for the third frame, I use this left, and the fourth frame, I use this left. So actually drawing the water is, while doing the tiling, is very time consuming. If I were more clever, I could probably do it in Godot itself. Anyway, yes, here we were. So subwater, and then water. Then the ground is on top of that. And what's happening is, the reason these are separated is that the water will be like drawn and animated between the subwater and the ground. Because if you zoom in, everything is they're squares, right? So let's look at, you know what, pretty much any of these. So like here, this square, we're only able to see the, like see some of the water, right? Because the ground is drawn on top of it. But all of these 3, the subwater, the water, and the ground, they are drawn behind the player. So when the player is walking around, anything you see on the screen, the player will be drawn in front of it. As opposed to foreground is drawn in front of the player. So as Zemi's walking around, she steps here, then her upper body will be in front of the tree. But if she goes up here, then the tree will be drawn in front of Zemi. So that's all this. And then on here we have NPC collisions and collisions. All the yellow things, these are the player collisions. The yellow, that's where Zemi cannot step. So I have these yellows here because if Zemi were to step, or the player, right, whatever you're controlling, if you were to step here, you'd be able to see off the edge of the map, which would look bad. And then, you know, you don't want her like walking through buildings or fences or tree stumps, things like that. So the collisions are normal. The NPC collisions, these are additional restraints where the NPCs can't step. So like here is an NPC called Bunyan. There's an NPC over here called Legolas, and so on. The blues are where the NPCs can't step. And I have these because, you know, I used to have some here. I'll put those back. So right here, for example, oh, you can actually see the sausage making. I don't want the NPCs standing here because if they're standing here, just hanging out, and they're idling, not moving anywhere, then they might be really hard to see. It'll be easy to pass by them. So I want the NPCs to be more visible. I mean, not only that, but spend some time working on them. Here is probably fine to omit these because the Legolas NPC is constantly moving around, whereas Bunyan, he can be a slow mover. Now, with that said, we could check out real quick, click on NPCs. So these are the names of, well, in code, these are the names of the different NPCs. They are all different instances, so to speak, of the same scene. Here's the NPC scene, and this is what is slapped in different places of the level. And they have things like collisions. They either have a PC sprite or an NPC sprite. For example, one of the characters in the village, Kane, I used a pre-existing PC sprite. Most of them use an NPC sprite. These rays are for like collision detection, and then this canvas layer is for everything. Like if you were to talk to them, then their face may or may not pop up. The PC's face may or may not pop up, and so on and so forth. And that is pretty much the case for all these things over here. I did the NPCs first, and then animals, which you can't interact with. They are like simplified NPCs. And then the treasure chests, which is stuff, these are basically simplified, also simplified NPCs. And then the searchables, they're like simplified treasure chests. With that said, there's one more thing I want to show. So actually loading up the game. Ooh, kind of laggy. I would guess it's because the screen recording is going on for who knows how long. It takes us 10 years because I'm created.